I read a self-published fantasy series, and today I'll try to answer, is it bad? Or more specifically, how does it compare to traditional published fantasy books? The series I'm talking about is the Threadlight series by Zack Argyle, and I'll look at 3 different areas, which are covers, physical copy quality, and storytelling, and I'll try to answer if I can see clearly that this is a self-published series. Sorry for interrupting the video, just want to say a special thanks to my patrons who support my passion for books. I really appreciate it. So let's start talking about the covers, shall we? Right off the bat, these are some truly gorgeous covers. The cover art is by Omar Burak Onal, and I think he did a fantastic job on these. If you went into a bookshop and found these on any bookshelves, then I doubt that you would have thought that this isn't a traditional published book. What I love even more is that Argyle has invested money into making these covers match throughout the whole series. There's no doubt that these covers belong to the same series when you look at them. The crazy part is that we sometimes see traditional published series having mismatched covers or spines, but that is not a problem here. So for the covers, does the series live up to the traditional publishing quality? The answer to that is a definite yes. But I do have a bit of a minor criticism here. The title, Voice of War, is, in my opinion, not very accurate for the first book. The title kind of gives you the impression that the scale of the first book will be much larger and more epic. But the fact is that the first book is much more focused, and I believe that a publishing house would probably have changed the title. But interestingly, Argyle himself agrees with me on this point and has stated that he would have changed the title now if he was given the chance. But all the titles have 3 words, so I really do appreciate that they all match. So that is just a very minor criticism. Next up, print quality. Does the material of these books feel cheap, and is it worth investing money into the physical copy of the series? I don't have my physical copy of Voice of War with me here, but for the paperback I would say that it is exactly what you would expect from a paperback book. It is nothing special, but it's not badly printed or anything. But when it comes to the hardbacks, Argyle has really stepped it up compared to traditional published books. Not only does the book have the same gorgeous cover art, but there's also stunning artwork on the naked hardback. These are absolutely stunning and are a beautiful sight to have on your shelf. I would love to own these in hardback someday because they are just so beautiful. So, do the physical copies live up to the traditional publishing standard? Absolutely, and for the hardback, I would even argue that the normal hardback edition is superior than most normal traditional published hardbacks. But it makes no sense to buy any book if the story is no good, so let's talk about whether the story itself is good enough or if there are some so-called self-published mistakes here. So I won't give you a full summary here, and I would just recommend you reading the synopsis first, but this series is basically a story that starts quite focused in the first book, but over the course of book 2 and 3, the stakes are raised to the extreme, where life as we know it is of risk of ending, and genocide is a real possibility. This series is a multiple POV story with lots of different locations, lore, and has a very intricate and hard magic system. The story is told only around 1,000 pages, which is quite short considering that this is a fantasy trilogy. So let's talk a bit about the plot, character work, world building, and prose, and analyze whether we see any downfalls in any of these sections. Let's talk about prose. If there's one area that self-published books often get criticism, then it's regarding the prose. So, is Argyle's prose bad? No, it's not bad, but I wouldn't call it anything special either. The writing style is very accessible and easy to read, which makes the story feel very fast-paced, and for some readers, the prose will just be a bit too plain, but it will also be actually a major selling point for some. I will say that Argyle's prose gets increasingly better throughout the whole series though. Book 3 has a lot of fantastic quotes that actually will have you reread some sentences just so you can enjoy how beautiful they are written. But I do think it's impressive that I don't have any major criticisms regarding the prose, considering that this is a self-published series, so well done Argyle. Next up, let's talk about plot. When it comes to plot, I would say that Argyle does a very good job on how he structures the story. As I mentioned, the story starts quite focused and then more and more layers are increasingly added to the story. One of the challenges with fantasy is that it can be so easy to overwhelm the reader when you are trying to explain what is going on, but I definitely think that Argyle did a great job at keeping up a good balance here. There are a lot of unanswered questions after finishing the first book, but you definitely understand what is going on. In addition to having a really good structure, I also think the plot is enjoyable and it feels like it's bringing something new to the table. This series has a big focus on family, and one of the main characters has a small baby along with them throughout the story, which is something I don't think I've ever seen much in fantasy. The themes of family, raising a child, and being there for your children is very prevalent throughout the whole series, which is really cool. Also, I think that most fantasy readers will enjoy the overall plot. This is a very character-focused story, which basically is about trying to conquer an independent doom, but it has that modern feel where you have morally grey characters and different persons trying to get their way in this overall conflict. Also, Zack isn't afraid to kill off some of his characters, and he takes some very bold choices, especially at the conclusions. I really have to give Argyle credit for having the audacity for some of the choices he made at the very end of the series. Another aspect which makes the series really stand out is the pace. The pace is absolutely relentless from start to finish, and in some ways this series reminded me of The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, where each character brings another layer of tension or world building or some kind of action. If you enjoy fantasy stories with breakneck pace, then this series is for you. That being said, I definitely can imagine that if this was traditionally published, that this series would probably have had a bit slower pace. There are very few quiet moments in this series. I can imagine that a publishing house would probably have had Argyle maybe write another 100 or 200 pages just to make the story paced a bit slower, but I might be mistaken about that. But when it comes to the overall plot, I would say that this story is really good and enjoyable. So when it comes to the plot, I definitely think that this could be worthy of being a published series. So now let's talk about characters, and here I do have some minor criticisms, but I also have a lot of praise. When you try to write a 1000-page fantasy trilogy with lots of characters and locations, you are giving yourself a huge challenge in trying to create well-fleshed out characters, and I have to say that Argyle for the most part is able to do a very good job. But I will have to say that the character work is probably the weakest in book 1, albeit it's not bad. Our main character Chris is very well fleshed out, while Alvarax and Laurel in the first book definitely didn't get as much focus, but still definitely not bad. But the real issues is with the side characters. Since the books are so short and fast-paced, the reader doesn't really get that much time to get attached to the side characters. Now, I definitely think that Argyle did make a very conscious decision in not fleshing out the side characters as much so that he could keep the story really fast-paced. But, for example, Chris's wife, Ariel, I didn't really feel that much of a connection with her until much later in the series, and she is the main character's wife. So when it comes to the character work, I would probably give the main characters a solid B+, while the side characters will probably get a C. I want to emphasize though that it's really impressive that how Argyle is able to cover so much ground when you think about the length of the books. So did I notice that this was a self-published series when you look at the character work? I would definitely say no. World building. This is definitely one of the most impressive aspects of the whole trilogy. Not only is Argyle able to convey how everything works to the reader, but the world building is also super interesting and intricate. The series has a hard magic system, which kinda reminds me of the Mistborn series. The magic system has a lot of rules and limitations about who and how you can use it, which is explored throughout the whole series. This series also has scheming gods, animal pet companions, different races, and lots of diverse locations. It's especially in book 2 and 3 where the reader really starts to learn about the lore and mythology, and I really enjoyed learning about this world. I definitely think that the world building is one of the biggest highlights of this whole trilogy. I am very impressed how much ground Argyle is able to cover in such few pages. I'll definitely say that if you're looking for something similar to Mistborn when it comes to the magic system, then this might be worth checking out. So having read a whole self-published series, does it compare to traditionally published books? Overall, I think Argyle has done a phenomenal job. You could argue that the prose might be a bit too simplistic, or that the series should have been a bit longer, but for some readers, the pace and accessible prose is why they will love this series. This is definitely one of the best self-published series I have ever read, and I would highly recommend everyone giving this series a try, especially if you're a fan of fast-paced epic fantasy stories, such as John Gwynne's books, or if you enjoy intricate world building, such as Brandon Sanderson. I gave Voice of War, which is the first book, 4 stars, while Stones of Light and Bonds of Chaos got 4.5 stars from me. So why did I make this video? Well, I just wanted to prove that some self-published series are just as good as traditional published series, or sometimes even better. There are a lot of bad self-published series out there, but please do not disregard all self-published books just because some of them are bad. If you're curious about learning more about self-published books, then I've actually made a whole video about where you can find good self-published books and some of my favorites. So that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out my Patreon if you want to support what I do here. See you in the next video.